You're listening to the Membership Geeks podcast, bringing you proven practical tips and advice from the leading experts on growing a successful membership business.
What's up, membershipers? Welcome to a very special episode of the Membership Geeks podcast. You know, I say that every episode is a special episode, but today is a one I've been looking forward to for a long, long time because I am joined by the one and only Robbie Kellman Baxter. Now, Robbie wrote the book on memberships all the way back in, I'm pretty sure it was 2014, 2015. She wrote The Membership Economy, which at the time when the online membership space in particular was in its infancy, and indeed the broader membership world and the world of subscriptions was still in its early stages, Robbie's book was a bit of a game changer. And I had the privilege of having Robbie on the show in one of the very earliest episodes of the Membership Geeks podcast. Back then, it was called the Membership Guys podcast, and she dispensed a lot of wisdom about the world of subscriptions and memberships. But it's been almost a decade since Robbie first joined me on the podcast, and a lot has changed in the world of membership since then. Back then, her book, The Membership Economy, was the definitive guide to this emerging business model. And now in 2025, it's safe to say that she kind of saw the future clearer than most people did. So today, Robbie is back to talk about what's changed, what still works, and what membership site owners need to do to stay ahead in a very different landscape. So whether you're just starting out or you've been running a membership for years, this one is packed with timeless advice and future-focused strategy. So without further ado, we're going to dive in to my conversation with Robbie Kellman Baxter. Here we go. So my guest today is a consultant, instructor, author, and speaker who's written two best-selling books, The Membership Economy and The Forever Transaction. And she's also the host of the popular podcast, Subscription Stories. Robbie's been focused on subscription and membership models for the past 20 years, providing strategic business advice to major organizations, including Netflix, Microsoft, and the Wall Street Journal. And 9 years after first having the opportunity to interview her on what was then the Membership Guys podcast, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back Robbie Kellman Baxter. Robbie, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Oh, it's so fun to be back 400 some odd episodes later.
Yeah, that is really triggering an existential crisis around how long I've been doing this thing. But no, it's so fascinating as well to be coming up to almost a decade, because the world of memberships has changed so much. I mean, the world has changed. We've kind of been through a few things, right, in the last 9 or 10 years. But in your view, what are the most significant shifts that membership business owners need to understand in 2025?
Well, it depends on whether the last time they listened to the podcast was in 2016 or whether the last episode was at the end of December of 2024. I mean, I'll start by saying, broadly, when you and I were talking, I think we were both trying to serve as evangelists to say, hey, this is a really interesting model. You should consider it. It's a way of driving greater loyalty, engagement, recurring revenue, opportunities to deepen the relationship with your best customers, to be rewarded for a service orientation and a holistic view of your customer, and trying to get companies and individuals to say, this is the business model that I want to pursue. I think somewhere in the late teens, it became more understood. And then during COVID, between 2020 and 2022, it became, I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, the de facto model that, having a membership, having recurring revenue, building something that could be called a subscription was going to drive, greater predictability, greater cash flow, a more valuable company if you're thinking about selling it, better likelihood of getting someone from the outside to fund you. Everybody was doing it. And then COVID just accelerated that because there was, less and less opportunity to get together in person, more need for community connection, ongoing ways to solve problems. You couldn't like solve it fresh every time and go out in the world and just explore. So that takes us to 2022. I think since then, what's happened is there is a right sizing in the membership space, meaning that I think a lot of people who launched memberships, maybe especially in that go-go period from, let's call it 2019 to 2022, suddenly got a rude awakening and realized, I actually have to engage people once I bring them in. I have to have an offering that justifies a forever transaction if I want them to keep paying me forever. And that means that I have to be more deliberate and more scientific in the way that I run my business. And that's, I think, where we are. The last, I think, 2023, 2024 were pretty hard years for most people. I think things are getting better. Honestly, the kind of right sizing seems to have maybe leveled off a little bit, but we're now dealing with kind of a global, I would call it global chaos. And
I think that's a fair word.
Things are changing every day in terms of, leadership, wars, tariffs, and that does affect all of us. And so we just need to be more nimble. And that's kind of I think the order of the day for membership businesses as well, is both being nimble in terms of how we deliver value to our customers, our members, but also in what the content is, because our members are dealing with the same thing we are. And so I would imagine that that's very much on the minds of our members. How do I deal with these changes in the environment? How do I deal with the rise of AI? How do I deal with changes in globalization? And, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for the people I serve?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that boom during COVID absolutely was right across the spectrum, right down to the individual influencers and experts who were just looking to teach and start a community around what they were doing, where suddenly their industry just shut down. One of the people in our community, a guy called Jim Cooney, worked on Broadway, worked in performing arts, which of course that was one of the first things to go. And so he pivoted and started a membership supporting performing artists, and that's what he does now. And he's been running that since 2021, I believe. But I definitely think that maturation after COVID, when suddenly the real world came back in, and so too did the distractions, and so too did the demands of your members, your community, just functioning in the world. Whereas before, we kind of had a little bit of time on our hands. And so it is interesting that to describe it as that right sizing of perhaps those memberships that could have only really thrived or could have only started during COVID because of the lack of distractions, or perhaps finding it harder now. And the global chaos. I think that might be the term of the episode. I suppose that causes the double-edged sword of finding the balance between, when things are chaotic, are people going to be more drawn to starting a membership business because of the predictability and the stability that they might look to see to offset that chaos, versus the customer base who are perhaps a little less inclined to invest in too many things, too many memberships, because they don't know what's going on. That's a fine balance to achieve.
Yeah. I mean, I personally have seen over and over again that times of great change and chaos are great times to start businesses, and also great times to really rethink your fundamentals. And the reason is this. If your members are experiencing upheaval or change, they are looking for solutions to help them understand the world around them, make sense of the world around them, enjoy the world around them in new ways. Yeah. And so, they're kind of looking up and looking around. And, you said, they're reconsidering their subscriptions, right? And saying, how many of these do I really need? But they're also rethinking, how do I solve the problems in my life? And that might mean, how do I better understand what's going on in my profession? It might mean, how do I get enjoyment in a world that feels scary? That becomes important. How do I connect with like-minded people when I feel very alone? And these kinds of ongoing problems, I call them, a forever problem, right? Or a forever goal. They make way for, solving those and providing, a forever transaction, right? If you can promise that you can do one of these things that has become important, that is emerging, for example, AI and anything. At this moment, a lot of people have a problem with AI, right? What is it going to do? Is it going to make me obsolete? Is it going to make my life better? What do I do? Anyone who can explain that, and that's an ongoing issue. It's not like I could take a class today and be done. There's opportunity, and you can go really deep into the niche, right? You can be like, AI for podcasters, or AI for moms of toddlers, or, AI for software engineers focused on, GIS, whatever. So there's a lot of opportunity here. And it is not a time for steady state, tinkering, continuous small improvement. This is a time to take a step back, and say, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What would we be, and this is, I think, the money question. What would we be doing differently if we were starting today? And we were still trying to solve the same problem for the same group of people? Would we be doing that? And if so, how would we be solving that problem? And if not, if that problem is going away or somebody else is solving it better, what would we do right now with our strengths if we were starting a business right now?
Yeah, I think for the longer that people are running their memberships, the more important it is to constantly do that little check-in with themselves, because problems will change. And if a problem goes away, they're often replaced by a new problem. The world moves, industries move, new technology, whether it's something as gargantuan as AI or just something that's really, niche specific, there's always going to be a problem. People are always going to have issues to deal with. And so evolving along with your membership is probably more important than ever now that, people don't just need to go to a search engine to figure out how to do something. They can go and ask and have a whole conversation with ChatGPT. And so I suppose that brings to the question of, with the advances in automation and in AI, how do you see that balance playing out between systemization and kind of leveraging that within a membership-based business while emphasizing the human connection? Right? Again, how do you see that balance playing out? How important do you feel almost providing a counterbalance to AI is for particularly knowledge-based memberships?
Yeah. I feel like this is a softball question, right? I mean, the answer is humans are important. And as words and advice and information become more and more available, the difference is going to be who's telling you. And are they discerning, and have they framed in a way that you want and that you trust? I would say, there are a few different things that AI can do for you, right? One of them is it can manage, it can be your assistant, right? It can manage automated tasks. A second thing is it can be your creative team and actually, create content for you. And the last one, I think, is it can be a thought partner, right? So it can be and I think the first and last ones are, I think, most valuable for those of us in the membership space. I think the content creation one is kind of I don't know if I'd call it a red herring, but it seems like it's going to save you a lot of time, right? I'll just have AI create, you can have AI create a podcast from almost anything, right? But I don't think people are going to want to listen to that. No. We're all kind of getting our ears tuned and our eyes tuned to AI generated content. And while it can be really helpful if you're saying, give me a few examples that I can then throw into my conversation, it's great. But if it just, if it's the whole script is AI generated, you can feel that. And also, I really worry about the fact that, it becomes more and more derivative, right? Because what is it doing? It's taking everything out there and synthesizing it. And if it keeps synthesizing, and then that's put out there and added in, it just creates a narrower and narrower range of what you're going to have. And there's no room for, that interesting insight, that crazy analogy, that, that human aha that is so fun and valuable when you're listening to a podcast, or reading content, or watching a show, or anything that is creative.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just being human, putting the human element into it. And it's remembering as well, particularly with content creation, when you're using it, AI's purpose isn't to create the best piece of work. AI's purpose is to please whoever is instructing it. And so it's not serving an audience, it's not serving your members. So obviously, the stuff that people shouldn't do, just using AI to churn out generic content, there's always going to be people doing that. And that's just kind of adding to the noise, adding to, I suppose, the competition for where people are going to have problems solved. It's probably noisier than it's ever been. So what can modern memberships do differently to cut through that and to stay, I don't even want to say stay valuable, but to stay valuable in the eyes of their members? Because they might be delivering value, but if people aren't seeing
I would say value is in the eye of the member. And I think a huge mistake of entrepreneurs is that just because it was hard for them to create the product or the offering does not mean that it's valuable. So I can create a newspaper that's full of articles that are well researched and took a long time and are well fact checked. But if it's not in the style that's interesting to you, if it's not on the topics that you care about, there is no value to you. You are not willing to pay me any money for it. And I see this all the time with newspapers, right? They'll say, but we have really valuable, our newspapers have such valuable content, but you know what? Nobody wants to consume it. And I'm like, well, then it's probably not that valuable, or it's not perceived as valuable. And if you're trying, you need to be paid by somebody who finds it valuable. So in the case of news, where, we probably all agree that there's a lot of value to news that nobody really wants to read, like speaking truth to power, holding people accountable, writing about what's really happening. Even if I don't really want to read that, I'd rather do the crossword puzzle or look at recipes. It is important. But then you have to think about who's going to pay for that. It's probably going to be more of a philanthropic thing, or, a grant-based thing than, generating your revenue from consumers, because consumers are always going to want things that are fun and easy. So, what I would say to get back to your question, what could membership business owners be doing right now to make sure that they have value in this very tough time is really focus in, number one, on what their people are willing to pay for, cutting the stuff they're not willing to pay for. So I think a lot of organizations are really great at adding stuff, and they're not that great at sunsetting. And everything you offer, number one, has some kind of a cost to it for you, even if it's, content that you created 5 years ago and you're like, well, it's free. But the problem is, number one, you have to maintain it. And number two, when a new person comes into your community, if you have an old crappy piece of content and that's the first thing they experience, they're going to leave. And if they kind of stumble upon old stuff mixed in with the good stuff, the mediocre filler with the good stuff, they're going to come up with an average of how valuable you are. Whereas if all you have is a small set of hyper valuable focused content or experiences, that requires really knowing your members well. It requires being somewhat disciplined and limited about who you accept into the community. Because if your community has any elements of, or if your membership has any elements of community in it, if I'm looking for best practices in leadership and I am paired in a group activity with somebody who's never led a team, and I run a company with 500 employees, I'm going to cancel right there.
Yeah.
Like, that is a waste of my time. Now, you might say, well, you might learn something from this 22-year-old, or, maybe listen to, but, I'm coming to talk to people like me. And, understanding that I think is super important. And a tactical thing, there's a couple tactics that you can do. One of them is get really clear on which features that you offer drive acquisition and which features that you offer keep people from canceling. And get really clear about it. Like when someone cancels, understand why they canceled. And when people have been members a long time, ask them why they've stayed.
Yeah.
Right. And when people join, see what the first thing they do is when they join, then you know why they joined. And if you see that, then you'll know what the valuable features are. And if you see what they're not using, you might think about sunsetting them. I know that there's sometimes reasons to keep them, but just be a little more disciplined. And then also follow someone on their journey. What are the features that they use as they onboard? And then what are the features they use on an ongoing basis? And then on the back end, if you understand the person's journey, so let's say that you have a photography membership and you provide courses on how to use your iPhone for photography, and you have a community where people share pictures and give each other feedback, and you have lessons that are live once a month or troubleshooting once a month, right? People come in, they probably don't know much about them. They just bought a phone or they just decided they want to learn. And then what happens, right? People get good enough, and a lot of people drop off because they're like, I'm good enough. I've reached the first thing. So what would keep them? And get laser focused on that. What would keep that small segment of people that have consumed all of your content and don't need more, right? What's the next thing? And if they don't need more, maybe encourage them to be a leader in the community, right? Offer them status and recognition. Let them run the troubleshooting sessions. That's prestige, which is actually a really valuable feature to offer, right? I offer the feature of prestige. So really think about that, why people come, why they stay, why they leave, and what you could do to get them to not leave.
I really like that, and not just using that data for figuring out, okay, what content should we add next? People are really drawn to this feature or to this content, so I'm going to utilize the data to inform more additions. Having that discipline, and absolutely, my hands are thrown up. Sunsetting is definitely not my strong suit, because the whole killing your darlings thing of like, I remember how long that took. I loved that course. It was so useful. It's 8 years out of date, but it's still like, yes. And I think a lot of membership owners of kind of content heavy educational memberships probably are sitting feeling a little guilty right now. And I wonder whether, sorry.
That's all. Go on.
No, I was going to say, I wonder whether some of that is driven by, obviously, in those kind of earlier days of the online membership space starting to come to life, looking at those forward-thinking companies like Netflix, where they offered so much. And I think Netflix kind of went through a phase where they just seemed to be commissioning every TV show and every movie idea, and then they seemed to recognize that, okay, actually killing some of that off and contracting a little bit is the way to go. But I'm wondering whether that pressure that some membership owners put on themselves to kind of be the Netflix of their industry. I absolutely know there was a phase where every sales page for kind of, the smaller one-man memberships claimed to be the Netflix of skateboarding tuition, the Netflix of piano teaching. I think everyone was trying to be that. And so that focus was on more is better, which evidently it's just not.
Well, it can work if you truly are Netflix, but that means, let's talk for a minute about Netflix since you brought it up, right? Number one, Netflix was first. So even when their content library wasn't complete, they had way more than anybody else. Number one. Number two, when you look closely at what is in their content library, they actually have different categories for both attracting and engaging. So usually people come for some specific title. But the truth is they stay for Adam Sandler. Like they stay for the Netflix and chill content, which is not, I would argue it's not their best content. It's not their most differentiated content, but it's content that is the right vibe for people who consume Netflix. And it's the right kind of content that makes people not want to cancel. Same thing with really long running series. I don't know if CSI, I think CSI is on Netflix. And what's the other one? SVU, and there's a few other shows that are really long running. ER. that people just love to watch a couple of episodes before bed. And, I don't think if you asked your friends why they keep their Netflix subscription, I don't think anyone's going to cop to that and admit that that's what they're watching. But that is what they're watching, right?
Yeah.
We're all, and so what they've done a really good job of understanding is that you come for the prestige TV or the sports event or whatever, and you stay for the comforting content. And so they've really gone heavy into those two areas. For little companies, I mean, I think it's a huge problem that so many companies, and I know you have too, but I've worked with so many companies that are going to be the Netflix of whatever, Netflix of bicycle products, the Netflix of dental hygiene management, whatever, right? And usually if you probe with them, you say, what do you mean? Like, what is it about Netflix that you want to be? Because Netflix probably has the most transparent communication of any subscription. Their pricing, they pretty much, I mean, they have a few marginal, differently priced options, but tiny, tiny fractions of people use them. The vast majority of us have the same deal. And it's monthly. They don't have quarterly pricing. They don't have annual pricing. They don't have save with bigger commitment. That's great for everybody to consider. They make it really easy to cancel. They're very clear when they raise prices. The user experience is super easy. Everybody knows how to access Netflix on their TV. Anybody that has it, it's not hard. If you've ever tried to access, let's say, Amazon Prime or Apple TV, it's a little more complicated.
Yes.
And so, those are some things that Netflix does that when you say we want to be like Netflix. But I think what a lot of people mean is huge catalog of content.
Yes.
And a couple of things. One is people might want a huge catalog of content for streaming video content, lean back kind of enjoyment. But they don't want unlimited content on piano tuition. Tutorial, right? Tutorial education on piano, right? You want the right next thing for you, right? And so you don't need everything. You just need the right next thing for you. And you don't want to do tons of content. You want to do the content that's going to allow you to perform in the way that you want to. So, that's one thing. The second thing is a lot of organizations get overly attached to their content. So people might come for the content, but they stay for the community, right? Or they come for the content, but they stay for the expert guidance. That, like, back to the photography, like you watch the videos, but then you say, okay, I was out trying to take pictures and the sky was overcast and it was my only chance to capture the Eiffel Tower and I couldn't get there at sunrise. So now what do I do? Right? I have a very specific question, and having access to the experts, and sometimes it's just really hard when there's so much content to find where is the right 2-minute video for that particular situation. So thinking about other ways to solve people's problems becomes important.
Yeah, definitely. And not focusing on more is better, or volume. I want to be Netflix because Netflix are successful. Because, of course.
Right.
And obviously, in talking about that kind of Netflixification of every industry, every kind of niche, when we spoke back in 2016, you predicted membership models would infiltrate physical products, would infiltrate healthcare, would just kind of start taking over all these industries that did not have subscription aspects to them. And I think it's safe to say that was a pretty spot on prediction. Now that memberships and now that subscriptions are kind of everywhere, you can get your car on subscription, and companies like Adobe have just totally shifted from software sales to subscription-based models. Now memberships everywhere. Is that helpful or hurtful for new people coming into the membership space? Is how big a problem is subscription fatigue? Has that kind of come and gone? Where do you think we are with that? Is there too much membership?
Yeah, good question. Well, so first of all, the Adobe story is a great and instructive story, the one that you brought up. One of the really early companies to actually have to change their business model from transactional to subscription. I just had on my podcast the CFO at the time of that transition, who really was the lead sponsor for that transformation, talking about what they had to do. And honestly, a really big piece of what they had to do was educate their board, educate their peers in the company, and educate their customers that this could be better for everyone. We don't have to do that anymore. That is an advantage, right? If you're going into a membership business today, you do not have to explain to your target market why you are structuring your offering as an ongoing experience with access to a bundle of benefits, which might include, content, community, expert advice, physical product, what have you. People are familiar with the model. They're used to giving you their credit card and having it automatically charged every month or every quarter or every year. The technology to support it, the infrastructure. I mean, a lot of people have been around a long time. I also had, Babbel, the CEO of Babbel, the language learners subscription company. They built everything in-house, because they started 16 years ago, right? They built all their subscription billing in-house because there was nothing on the market that solved their problems. So we don't have to do that anymore, right? There's all kinds of tools. So that's the good news. The bad news, as you point out, is that consumers are weary. They're a little suspicious, right? They hear that you're asking for a subscription, and they really want to understand, is the bundle of benefits you're offering something that I'm going to really want forever? So example, back to the photography thing, right? I might be planning a trip, a big, trip of a lifetime. And so I want to take an iPhone photography class. I really just want to take it for the days leading up to my trip. And then after that, I'm not going to be quite as interested. Now, they could say, but our content is great for anything, and taking pictures of your kids and taking pictures of the landscape and taking pictures of whatever. But if that's not the market, like I'm not in that market, I'm in the taking pictures on your vacation, which is coming up. So people say, oh, well, I'm only going to use it for a month. So I'm going, in fact, I just had this conversation with my husband about a particular membership. I'm like, okay, we're going to really need this for the next 3.5 months. I'm going to make a notation so that we can cancel, because it's the only way to subscribe. So I think as a business, understanding that is important. So your subscription should stand the sniff test of, does this really make sense to subscribe forever? One funny example of one that did not pass the sniff test, literally, was a woman that I met at somewhere where I spoke at a conference, and she was saying that she's having trouble with retention. I asked her about her business. It's a potty training business. So for all you, young parents of young children, right? We all know that, like, you start potty training your kid. If they do not take to it in just a few weeks, you probably stop and come back later. And if they don't do it in 6 months, like, you have a problem, right? You have a health problem with your child. You're not going to stay a subscribing member to a potty training community for more than 6 months under any circumstances. Now, she had a lot of other options, right? She could have said, this is a parenting, parenting challenges community, and it's from birth to 3 years old. That would be a 3-year subscription, which is actually fantastic for most businesses. You could do that, or you could have a, diaper delivery service, which, has a probably 2 to 3 year lifetime. But her choice to focus so narrowly on her potty training methodology and expecting people to stay forever was just really silly.
Yeah, I would love to see some of the messaging or emails that you kind of sent around that 6-month mark to try to convince people they need to stick around. That is a fascinating marketing I think it's that double-edged sword again. The savviness of the average consumer, the average person who would join your membership, works in your favor because you don't have to sell the notion of a subscription. But that also does come with a greater level of awareness. And a lot of banks, and financial services seem to have tools now which will flag subscriptions, or which will enable you to cancel all subscriptions or see what's going out with your bank regularly and just one click cancel, which again, it's just, there's more management, there's more stuff in the hands of people. You have obviously legislation's catching up now. FTC's click to cancel stuff. We've got the equivalent here in the UK. It's rolling across Europe, and it's fantastic for members and for stopping companies from doing, this is the quote that I always just associate with you, hiding the cancel button. But of course, as a membership owner, there's an upside and I suppose a downside or a challenge with that increased power, control, education, awareness that your average member will have.
Absolutely. I left corporate many, many years ago. And one of the reasons was that I wanted to live by my own values. If you're making money because people aren't able to cancel with you and they're paying for something that they actually did not mean to pay for, that's just, you should feel bad about that.
Yes.
There's a lot of businesses that are going to argue with me and say that that's good strategy and all of that, and adding an extra step to the cancel flow, extends a subscription by so many periods and so on. But I think that's unethical, even if it is legal, which increasingly it is not, as governments and regulatory bodies have gotten savvier about this. But I mean, come on. Like, this should be a wake-up call for you. If this is a problem for you, that means your subscription's not that good.
Yeah.
Right? And so you need to focus on real value that people want to pay for and continue to pay for, even when they're completely aware that they're paying for it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a drum that I think needs continuously banging. So as a final question for anyone who is listening to this right now, 2025, and they're thinking about what's ahead, they're thinking about the next 5 to 10 years, because you kind of nailed that prediction of where the membership world was going the last time we spoke 9 years ago, based on where you think, where you see things shifting to, the challenges people have, a lot of what we talked about, what would you say is one big move, bold move, core thing that membership owners should be doing now to future-proof their business for the next 5 or 10 years, so that, if we have you back on for episode 826, we can look back and say, hey, you got
I'm available.
Spot on.
I want in. I want in on episode 826. I'm there. I think, the general advice that I would give is, make sure that your dashboard balances and gives equal credence to things relating to acquisition, things relating to retention, and things relating to engagement/expansion. I see too many organizations really become dependent on one of those. At the beginning, it's usually new membership groups almost always over-index on acquisition. And long-standing membership organizations over-index on retention. And they say, our existing members love us, but we're having trouble acquiring new members. And that is a signal that your offering is no longer competitive, no longer relevant. That should be a huge wake-up call to you. If you say, and you see this, newspapers, gyms, professional societies say this all the time, and the conclusion they jump to, which I think is the wrong conclusion, is young people are not that into, like, the forever promise of news, understanding the world around them. Like, that's ridiculous. Of course, young people want to understand the world around them. It's just that they don't believe that your newspaper is the best way for them to achieve that ongoing goal of understanding the world around them, right? It's not that they're not into entertainment anymore, that they're maybe not subscribing to, let's say, Netflix, although that's not an issue. It's maybe that they're finding better content on YouTube, and maybe it's free. So if you have a problem with acquisition, take a hard look at why, and don't just settle on young people aren't willing to pay for this because they're not willing to pay for what you have, maybe, but why not? That would be kind of my steady state, always do this. And then, in terms of, a prediction or kind of where the world is going, I think organizations that can continue to focus on aligning the member outcome, desired outcome, with the way they package their value are the ones that are going to do well. So I really instruct people, when you're starting a membership, keep your pricing very simple. But over time, you may find that there are very specific niches where a different pricing structure might make more sense, like usage-based pricing, like a fixed price for a certain experience. Like if you're doing the photography site, like there might be something like an intensive, a pre-trip of a lifetime, boot camp, right? And it's 4 weeks and it's really expensive and you're all in and you're done. That might be a better way of structuring your value. So those would be my two things. The dashboard with the 3 metrics and a continued alignment of your value packaging with your members' ongoing objectives.
Definitely. I love that. And yes, I'm looking forward to chatting more about that in episode 826. So if you're not subscribed yet, get subscribed. You'll be in for a wait. Robbie, thanks so much for coming on the show. I could just listen to you talk about the world of memberships, particularly outside of, the smaller little pocket of the membership world that we occupy here at Membership Geeks with the online education and experts and influencers. Like the fact that these best practices, the fact that, the challenges, the changes, the trends, actually hearing about those out there in the wider world of memberships, right from those huge behemoths like Netflix on down. I still find it fascinating. This is just a chance for me to geek out and chat memberships with you. For anyone who wants more from you, where can they find you? Where's the best place to learn more from you?
Best place is probably my website, which is my name, RobbieKellmanBaxter.com. But I also post on LinkedIn every day.
Awesome. So we'll have the links in the show notes, as well as links to buy Robbie's 2 books, which you should already have, because these are genuinely, Membership Economy is literally wrote the book on memberships, and that was one of the very first things we read when we were starting out in our journey. So it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the show and talk about this with you. And look forward to having you back in another 9 years.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks again to Robbie for joining me on the show almost a decade after I first had the chance to interview her all the way back in 2016. And, a lot of the stuff we talked about in that conversation was where the business model was going, where the world of memberships was going. And she called it on so many fronts. So it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve, how things develop, and how some of the tips and advice that Robbie shared will be applied to the continued evolution of the membership model. All right, that is it from me. I do hope you enjoyed our conversation today. I'll be back again very soon with another episode of the Membership Geeks podcast. Bye for now. If you enjoyed this week's episode of the Membership Geeks podcast, we invite you to check out membershipacademy.com. Membership Academy is the original membership about memberships, and it's the essential resource for anyone at any stage of starting, growing, and running a successful online membership business. Whether you're still trying to figure out what your idea is going to be and you need some help making it a reality, or whether your website is already up and running and you're looking for ways to grow and attract new members, then Membership Academy can help you to get to the next level. Not only do you get access to our step-by-step membership roadmap, our extensive training library, and exclusive member-only discount and tools, you'll also become part of our supportive, active community of membership owners that will help you along the way in your journey with feedback, encouragement, and advice. All of this and more make Membership Academy the #1 place to be for anyone looking to start, manage, and grow a successful membership business. Check it out and join the community at membershipacademy.com.